There are people who walk into your family like they belong there. They learn your rhythms. They sit at your table. They hug your mother at Christmas. And all the while, and behind that smile, behind those handshakes, behind all of it, they are taking everything they can get their hands on. Not just money, not just loyalty, your trust, your time, your family's sense of safety. And when it all comes apart, when the mask finally slips, the question is never just, how could he do this? The question is, what are you going to do about it? Welcome to Revenge Files. Every week I bring you real stories. Stories pulled from Reddit threads, from court records, from the kind of confessions people only make anonymously at 2 a.m. Stories of betrayal and what came after. Today's story has everything. A perfect marriage that wasn't. A family torn apart by someone they loved. A brother who said nothing for years and then said everything all at once. Names and identifying details have been changed to protect the people involved. But I promise you, every piece of this is real. This is the story of Ryan, Sarah, and the man who thought he had gotten away with it. He hadn't. To understand this story, you need to understand Ryan first. Ryan was 33 years old, software engineer, the kind of guy who could spend 4 hours debugging a line of code without losing his patience, but would absolutely lose it if someone put the milk back in the fridge with barely a drop left inside. He was precise, he was methodical. He remembered things. That last part matters, remember it. Ryan had one sibling, his sister Sarah, 3 years older. And if you've ever had that one person in your life who just gets you, who has known you since before you knew yourself, that was Sarah for Ryan. They had grown up in a house that wasn't always easy. Their parents had a marriage that lasted more years than it probably should have, held together by stubbornness and Sunday dinners and the particular kind of silence that families learn to live inside of. When their parents finally separated, Ryan was 16, Sarah was 19, it was hard. But it also clarified something for both of them. They had each other. Whatever else happened, they had each other. Sarah went to college, then graduate school. She became a physical therapist. She was warm and sharp and funny in that dry, understated way that sneaks up on you. She was also, and Ryan would be the first to tell you this, an incredibly loyal person. Sometimes too loyal. Which is exactly the kind of person that a man like Derek Holloway looks for. Derek Holloway entered their lives at a dinner party in the summer. He was a friend of a friend. One of those introductions that happen in that easy, low-stakes way where nobody is really paying attention. But Derek was always paying attention. He was 36, tall, well-dressed in that effortless way that takes a lot of effort. He worked as a certified public accountant, ran his own small firm, talked about his clients with just enough vagueness to seem discreet and professional. He was charming, really genuinely charming. And here's the thing about charming people. The good ones make you feel like the charm is for you specifically. Like you're special, like they don't do this with everyone. Derek was very, very good at that. He and Sarah talked for 2 hours that night. By the end of the evening, he had her number. By the end of the week, they had a date. By the end of the month, Sarah was telling Ryan she had met someone incredible. Ryan listened. He asked the right questions. He was happy for her. But somewhere in the back of his mind, in that quiet and methodical brain of his, something small and nameless filed itself away. He couldn't explain it. It wasn't anything Derek said or did. It was more like The way Derek never quite finished a sentence about himself before pivoting the conversation back to Sarah. Like he was very skilled at being present without actually revealing anything, Ryan noticed. He said nothing. First mistake. 14 months after that dinner party, Ryan stood at the altar as Sarah's witness and watched his sister marry Derek Holloway. It was a beautiful wedding. Genuinely beautiful. Derek cried during the vows. Real tears, or at least they looked real. Sarah was radiant. She was happy in a way Ryan hadn't seen in years. Maybe ever. And Ryan stood there and thought, maybe I was wrong. Maybe that instinct was just overprotective brother noise. Maybe Derek is exactly who he says he is. He gave a toast. He meant every word of it. He welcomed Derek into the family. Now, before we go any further, I want to pause here for a second. Because this is the part of the story that people sometimes gloss over. The part where everything looks fine. Where life is moving forward and the warning signs are just feelings, not facts. Ryan didn't do anything wrong by trusting Derek. Sarah didn't do anything wrong by loving him. The only person who did something wrong is the person who spent years building a lie careful enough to fool everyone. And Derek had been building his lie for a very long time. The first 2 years of Sarah and Derek's marriage looked, from the outside, like something out of a catalog. They bought a house. They had a dog, a golden retriever named Biscuit, who Ryan genuinely loved more than he was willing to admit. Derek was attentive. He remembered anniversaries. He cooked on Sundays. He called Sarah's mother just to check in. He was, by every visible measure, a good husband. But here's what nobody saw. Behind the scenes, Derek had a second phone. He had an email address that Sarah didn't know about. He had a woman named Amber, a paralegal he had met at a professional conference, who genuinely believed that Derek was in a long-distance arrangement with a wife he was separated from. Derek had told Amber that he and Sarah had been living separately for over a year, that the divorce was in process, that he was just waiting for things to finalize before he and Amber could be together properly. He had told Amber this for 11 months. And then there was Jessica. Jessica was a woman Derek had met through a dating app. Yes, a dating app while married. 6 months into his relationship with Amber. Jessica thought Derek was divorced. Jessica thought they had a future. And then there was a third woman, we'll call her Claire, who had been in the picture even longer. Since before the wedding, since before Sarah. 3 women, all of them deceived. All of them kept in separate, airtight compartments of Derek's life. This is the part where you might be asking yourself, how does someone manage all of that? The answer is very carefully, and with complete contempt for every single person involved. It was a Tuesday evening in November, year 3 of the marriage. Sarah had gone to the hospital to visit her aunt, who had been admitted earlier that day with a minor cardiac episode. Nothing life-threatening, but scary enough to pull the whole family's attention. Before she left, she handed Ryan her laptop. It had been running slow for weeks. A virus, probably. Nothing serious. She asked if he could take a look while she was gone. Ryan sat down at the kitchen table with the laptop and a cup of coffee and started running a diagnostic. He wasn't snooping. I want to be very clear about that. He was simply opening Chrome to download a cleaning tool when the browser loaded, and Sarah's messaging app was still open in a tab. And a notification had just come in. Ryan glanced at it. Just a glance. The kind you can't help. And then he read it again. Slowly. The message was from a woman he had never heard of, and it said, "Sarah, I know this is going to sound insane, but I need to talk to you about your husband. My name is Amber. I've been seeing Derek for almost a year. He told me you two were separated. I just found your wedding photos online. Please, I need to know the truth." Ryan set down his coffee cup. He read the message 4 more times. Then he took his phone out of his pocket and took a photograph of the screen. Then he sat very still for a long time. This is the moment. And if you've been in any version of this situation, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is the moment where the world doesn't end, but the version of the world you were living in does. Everything looks the same. The kitchen is the same. The rain on the window is the same. But something has shifted underneath it, and you can feel it, and you know that nothing is going to go back to how it was. Ryan opened the message thread. He read everything. Amber had been sending messages to Sarah for 3 days, increasingly desperate. She had found Sarah's contact through a mutual connection on LinkedIn. She had agonized over whether to reach out. She had finally decided she had to. Her messages painted a picture that made Ryan's hands go cold. Derek hadn't just cheated. Derek had constructed an entire parallel reality. Dates, stories, a fake separation timeline. He had told Amber things that required planning, forethought, sustained, deliberate deception. This wasn't an affair born from weakness or loneliness or a bad moment. This was a system. Ryan closed the laptop, poured himself a whiskey he hadn't touched in 2 years, and waited for his sister to come home. When Sarah came home, Ryan didn't say anything right away. He made her a cup of tea. He asked about her aunt. He let her settle. And then he said, "Before you do anything else, I need you to look at something." He turned the laptop toward her and pointed to the tab. Sarah read the messages. All of them. She didn't cry. That was the thing that stayed with Ryan longest. She didn't cry. She sat perfectly still and she read, and when she was done, she placed both hands flat on the table like she was steadying herself against something invisible. Then she said quietly, "How long has this tab been open?" Ryan told her. She nodded slowly. And then she said something Ryan has never forgotten. She said, "I think I already knew. Not this, not the details. But I think some part of me already knew something was wrong, and I just kept choosing not to look." They talked for 3 hours. Sarah went through her own memories methodically, the way you do when you're trying to find the lie inside something that looked like truth. The business trips that ran slightly longer than they should have. The second phone she had once seen and accepted his explanation for. A work phone, he said, for client calls after hours. The way he sometimes seemed to be performing attentiveness rather than actually feeling it. Small things, each one explainable on its own. Together, a map. At 11:30 that night, Derek came home. He walked in the front door calling Sarah's name in that easy, familiar way. He stopped when he saw Ryan sitting at the kitchen table. And then he saw Sarah's face. Sarah didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She pointed to the suitcase she had packed and left by the door and said very calmly, "You need to go." Derek started to speak. Sarah said, "We know about Amber." The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. And in those 4 seconds, Ryan watched something happen to Derek's face that he would describe later as the performance stopping. Just for a moment. Just long enough to see what was underneath. Then the performance started again. Denial, explanation, pleading. Sarah said, Go. Derek went. In the weeks that followed, the full picture came into focus. And it was worse than Ryan had thought. Much worse. Amber agreed to speak with Sarah directly. That conversation lasted 2 hours and left both women shaken, not just by what Derek had done, but by how consistent he had been. He had used almost identical language with both of them. The same expressions of love. The same stories about his childhood. The same habits and jokes and small rituals of intimacy. He hadn't just cheated, he had duplicated himself. Run the same script with multiple people simultaneously, with enough variation to keep each version convincing. Jessica, the third woman, was harder to reach. She had already figured out something was wrong on her own. Derek had gone quiet on her around the time Sarah had found out. And when Ryan eventually made contact through a carefully worded message, she responded within an hour. She was furious. She had been seeing Derek for 8 months. She had met his colleagues. She had spent holidays with him. And Claire, the woman who had been in the picture since before the wedding, turned out to be the most devastating piece of the puzzle. Because Claire had a daughter, a little girl who was 2 years old. A little girl whose father, according to Claire, was Derek Holloway, who had told Claire for 2 years that he was going to leave his wife, that it was complicated, that he just needed more time. Ryan found out about Claire's daughter on a Thursday afternoon in December. He sat with that information for a long time. Then he called the lawyer he had already retained, and he told her everything. And then he started planning, not from anger, or not only from anger, from something colder and more precise than anger. From the methodical, patient, detail-oriented part of his brain that had always been his greatest asset. Derek Holloway had built a system. Ryan was going to dismantle it, piece by piece, with documentation. Now, I want to walk you through exactly what Ryan did, because this is the part of the story that matters. Not just because it's satisfying, and it is deeply, deeply satisfying, but because of how he did it. Ryan didn't act on impulse. He didn't blow up Derek's phone or show up at his office or post everything on social media in a rage. He thought. He planned. He moved slowly. The first thing he did was make sure Sarah had a good divorce attorney. Someone experienced in contested cases. Someone who would know how to handle a situation with potential additional dependents and complex financial history. The second thing he did was go back through every financial document Sarah could access from their marriage. And here is where it gets interesting, because Derek, who managed Sarah's family's finances as a trusted advisor, not just as a husband, had done something deeply stupid. He had assumed that because he was the financial expert in the room, nobody would look too closely. He was wrong. Ryan was a software engineer. He wasn't an accountant. But he was extremely good at finding patterns in data, and what he found in those documents was a pattern that didn't belong. Over the course of 3 years, small amounts had been moving through Sarah's family accounts in ways that didn't line up with the stated purposes. Nothing that would catch your eye on a single bank statement. But across 3 years of statements laid out side by side, the picture was unmistakable. Ryan brought what he had found to Sarah's attorney, who brought in a forensic accountant. The forensic accountant spent 2 weeks with the documents. Then she delivered her findings. Derek had been quietly redirecting funds from Sarah's mother's investment account, money that Derek managed as the family's trusted advisor, into a holding company that existed on paper but had no real business operations. The total, over 3 years, $61,000. Sarah's mother was 72 years old. That money represented a significant portion of her retirement savings. Ryan read the forensic accountant's report 3 times. And then he felt something shift inside him. The last remaining piece of whatever charitable interpretation he had been holding onto for Derek Holloway. Gone. This wasn't a man who had made terrible personal choices and hurt people he loved. This was a predator, completely without remorse. Ryan closed the report, and he moved to step 2. Step 2 was the professional front. Ryan knew that Derek's accounting firm was the center of his world. 4 partners, a solid client roster, a reputation built over 18 years. Ryan also knew that a CPA license is not just a credential, it's a trust relationship. The licensing board takes misconduct very seriously, especially financial misconduct involving clients. Sarah's mother had been, in all practical terms, Derek's client. He had managed her money in an advisory capacity. That created a professional relationship with specific legal obligations. Obligations Derek had violated spectacularly. Ryan and Sarah's attorney filed a formal complaint with the state CPA licensing board. The complaint was detailed, documented, and included the full forensic accountant's report. At the same time, they reported the financial irregularities to the IRS. And because the forensic accountant had found evidence suggesting the holding company had been used to run undeclared income, there was a strong case for tax fraud on top of everything else. Now here's where Ryan showed real patience. He didn't tell anyone else what was happening. Not yet. He let the institutional machinery run its course. Because he knew something important. The most effective part of what was coming wasn't going to be the legal consequences. Those would take time. The most effective part was going to be the moment Derek's professional world found out who he actually was. And Ryan wanted that moment to land at exactly the right time. 3 months after Derek moved out, he had already begun rebuilding his public narrative. This is something Ryan had anticipated, and if you've ever watched a certain type of person go through a public separation, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The quiet campaign. The version of events that positions you as a reasonable person caught in an unfortunate situation. Derek was very good at this. He was sad about how things turned out. He wished Sarah well. He was focusing on work and taking things one day at a time. He had even, and this genuinely impressed Ryan in a cold, clinical way, preemptively told several mutual friends that Sarah's family had some financial matters they disagreed on, framing himself as the victim of an unfair dispute. He was getting ahead of the story. So Ryan made a decision. He was not going to let Derek Holloway write the first draft of history. He compiled a document, not a rage post, not a vague accusation. A calm, factual, fully documented account of what had happened. The 3 women, the forged separation documents Derek had given Amber, the financial misconduct, the forensic accountant's findings. He attached the evidence as a PDF. And he sent it to 8 people, specifically chosen. Not a mass blast, and 8 individuals who had been meaningful parts of both Sarah and Derek's lives. People who had attended the wedding. People who Derek had been leaning on as character references in his quiet campaign. The message was measured. It said, "I'm sharing this because you deserve to make your own judgment based on the facts. not because I'm asking you to take sides. He sent it on a Sunday evening. By Monday morning, 3 of Derek's closest friends had stopped responding to him. By Wednesday, one of them, a man who had known Derek for 15 years and had been his most vocal defender, had called Sarah to apologize. The social ecosystem Derek had spent years cultivating was quietly, efficiently collapsing. And he didn't understand why. Not yet. Here is where the story takes a turn that Ryan himself did not see coming. Amber, who by this point had ended things with Derek the moment she understood the full truth, had been in contact with Ryan for several weeks. She was angry, she was hurt, and she was, it turned out, extremely resourceful. Because Amber was a paralegal, and Amber had kept everything. Every message Derek had ever sent her, every voice note, every email, including one email, sent 8 months earlier when Amber had started pushing Derek to define their future, in which Derek had attached a document he claimed was his legal separation agreement with Sarah. A document that, Amber now realized, was completely fabricated. Derek had forged a legal document, created a fake separation agreement, used it to manipulate a woman into continuing a relationship under false pretenses. Forgery, fraud. The legal implications were significant. Amber turned everything over to Sarah's attorney. Around the same time, Claire, the woman with the young daughter, had retained her own attorney and filed for a paternity determination. DNA testing was ordered. Derek was now managing a divorce, a CPA licensing investigation, an IRS inquiry, a forgery allegation, and a paternity case. Simultaneously. And he was doing it while trying to maintain the fiction to mutual friends and colleagues that he was just going through a difficult personal period. The walls were closing in from every direction. And the thing that made it so complete, so almost mathematically perfect, was that Ryan hadn't created any of these consequences. He had simply documented the truth and made sure the right people had access to it. Derek had created the consequences himself. Every single one of them. Ryan had just made sure they couldn't be hidden. 6 months after the initial complaints were filed, the CPA licensing board completed its preliminary investigation. The findings were damning. Derek was suspended from practice pending a full disciplinary hearing. The board's preliminary report cited misappropriation of client funds, failure to maintain professional independence, and conduct unbecoming of a licensed professional. His partners at the firm, who had until this point been given only vague assurances by Derek that it was all a misunderstanding, received a copy of the board's findings. Derek was asked to leave the firm. Not suspended. Not given a leave of absence. Asked to leave. 18 years of professional reputation gone in an afternoon. The IRS investigation was ongoing. Those things moved slowly. But the forensic accountant's report had been formally submitted, and Derek's attorney had already made it clear that the evidence was difficult to dispute. The paternity test came back positive. Derek was the father of Claire's daughter. He was now legally obligated to establish a financial support arrangement for a child he had, until very recently been actively pretending didn't complicate his life. And the forgery allegation, the fake separation document he had sent Amber, had been referred to the district attorney's office for review. Derek Holloway, who 4 months ago had been a respected CPA with a beautiful home and a wide social circle and a story he completely controlled, was now a man with no license, no firm, no friends, 3 ongoing legal matters, a child support obligation, and a divorce that was costing him more each week as Sarah's attorney methodically documented everything. And he had done every single bit of it to himself. Sarah, in the middle of all of this, was living through something incredibly hard. I want to make sure we don't lose that. Because sometimes in these stories, the person who is most directly hurt becomes a supporting character in their own narrative. And that's not right. Sarah had loved Derek. She had built a life with him. She had a dog with him, for God's sake. And one of the most painful early decisions was figuring out what happened to Biscuit the golden retriever. She kept him. Derek didn't fight it, one of his few decent moves. She went through months where she questioned her own perception of reality, where she replayed conversations and moments and tried to find the lie inside them, not because it would help, but because the brain does that. It audits, it searches, it tries to make sense of something that was specifically designed not to make sense. She saw a therapist twice a week for the first 3 months. She leaned on Ryan, maybe more than she would have liked to, because Sarah was fiercely independent and asking for help did not come naturally to her. But she also, slowly, unevenly, with setbacks, started to come back to herself. She started running again. She had run competitively in college and had quietly stopped during the marriage without ever quite articulating why. Years later, she would tell Ryan that Derek hadn't forbidden it, or even discouraged it explicitly, but that she had gradually, subtly been made to feel that her own interests were inconveniences. She started running again, and it mattered more than she expected it to. She reconnected with friends she had drifted from. She redecorated the house, not dramatically, just enough to make it feel like hers rather than theirs. About 8 months after Derek left, she called Ryan on a Tuesday evening, the same day of the week, Ryan noticed, as the night he had found the messages, and said, "I think I'm okay. I think I'm actually going to be okay." Ryan didn't say much. He didn't need to. He said, "I know." About a year after everything came apart, Ryan and Sarah were sitting on her back porch. It was early autumn. The dog was asleep at their feet. They had eaten dinner and were in that comfortable silence that exists between people who have known each other their whole lives. Sarah said, "Can I tell you something that's going to sound weird?" Ryan said, "Obviously, yes." She said, "I'm not angry anymore, not the way I was, and I don't know if that's growth or just exhaustion." Ryan thought about that for a moment. Then he said, "Does it matter which one?" Sarah laughed, actually laughed. That dry, quiet laugh that Ryan had missed without knowing he was missing it. She said, "The thing that stays with me isn't even what he did. It's that I let myself become smaller to make room for him. And I didn't even notice it happening. That's the part that I'm still working through." Ryan didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "For what it's worth, you don't seem smaller anymore." She looked at him. He said, "You seem like you again." They sat there until it got dark. The dog snored. And it was, as Ryan would say later, one of the best evenings he could remember. So what happened to Derek Holloway? The last update in the original Reddit thread, posted about 14 months after the initial story, gave a partial picture. The CPA licensing board had held its formal hearing. Derek's license was revoked. Not suspended, revoked. Permanently. The IRS case had resulted in a settlement that cost Derek a significant amount of money and included penalties for the undeclared income routed through the holding company. The forgery allegation had been reviewed by the DA's office. No criminal charges were ultimately filed. The DA determined there wasn't enough to prosecute beyond a reasonable doubt. But the finding was part of Derek's public record in the civil proceedings. The paternity case was settled. Derek was legally obligated to provide financial support for Claire's daughter and to be present in the child's life in a structured, court-supervised arrangement. The divorce was finalized. Sarah received a settlement that her attorney described as fair given the complexity of the financial misconduct. The $61,000 taken from Sarah's mother's account was largely recovered. Derek, as of the last update, was working for a tax preparation franchise. Not a CPA firm, not his own practice. The man who had spent 18 years building a professional identity as a trusted financial advisor was doing seasonal tax returns. The user who posted the story didn't frame it as triumph. They framed it as resolution, a closing of a chapter that had been left open too long. Which I think is the right way to look at it. Here's what I keep coming back to with this story. Derek Holloway wasn't undone by a dramatic confrontation. He wasn't caught red-handed or publicly humiliated in a single moment. He was undone by documentation, by a brother who didn't act on impulse, who took screenshots instead of making accusations, who let institutions do their jobs, who shared the truth with exactly the right people at exactly the right time, and by the women he had deceived, Amber, Claire, Jessica, who chose not to stay quiet, who compared notes, who handed over evidence, who refused to let their part of the story disappear. There's a version of this story where Ryan storms into Derek's office and makes a scene, and Derek lawyers up immediately and everything gets messier and harder, and Sarah ends up worse off. Ryan chose a different version. Slower, more deliberate, more effective. The best revenge, and I'll say this every week because I believe it, is not chaos. It's the truth. Organized, documented, delivered to the people who need to see it. With patience. And without giving the other person a single thing they can use against you. Derek had every advantage at the start of this story. Charm, connections, a professional reputation, control of the narrative. He had one critical weakness. Everything he had built was built on lies. And lies when you stop protecting them. Collapse on their own. Ryan just stopped protecting them. If this story stayed with you, hit the like button and subscribe. Every week I bring you a new story from the files. Real people, real betrayals, real consequences. And if you know a story that belongs here, drop it in the comments or send me a message. These stories deserve to be told. This is Revenge Files. See you in the next one.